The human heart beats approximately 100,000 times a day, pumping life through a complex network of vessels, a fragile masterpiece of biology that can fail at any given second. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, 30-year-old Dr. Athena Kingston knew the precise weight of that fragility. She held life and death in her gloved hands beneath the harsh, sterile glare of the operating theater. For over a decade, her world had been defined by the rhythmic, mechanical blip of the heart monitor, the smell of antiseptic, and the agonizing, exhausting pressure of making split-second decisions where a millimeter's error meant a flatline. She had sacrificed her 20s to the gods of medicine, trading vibrant youth, birthdays, holidays, and regular sleep for towering stacks of textbooks, endless 24-hour shifts, and the profound, silent triumph of saving a life. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall, with elegant, sharp features, a disciplined posture, and a warm yet authoritative smile, Athena was the epitome of a self-made, highly successful woman. She was financially independent, deeply respected by the senior consultants at one of the largest government medical facilities in the southern region, and revered by patients who looked at her as an earthly savior. Yet, the moment she stepped out of the hospital and crossed the threshold of her family home, her professional brilliance, her years of excruciating sacrifice, and her monumental achievements vanished into thin air. In the eyes of her family, and most devastatingly, her father, Chief Richard Kingston, she was not an accomplished surgeon saving lives. She was an aging, defective product ticking past her expiration date. The contrast between her professional reality and her domestic purgatory was staggering. While strangers spoke her name with reverence, her father spoke it with growing impatience and a thin veil of shame. The overwhelming social pressure of their community dictated that a woman's ultimate, and perhaps only true, validation lay in her marital status. To them, it did not matter that she had survived the brutal gauntlet of medical residency. The only currency that mattered in their social circle was a wedding ring. The primary conflict in Athena's life was this suffocating, inescapable prison of societal expectations. Every single evening, she would return home with her shoulders aching from hours of intense surgery, her mind heavy with the weight of her patients' fates, only to be ambushed at the front door by the exact same piercing interrogation. It always began with her father, a man who had once proudly boasted that his daughter would become a doctor, but who had now pivoted into a frantic, desperate dictator of her personal life. "When are you getting married?" he would ask, his voice dripping with an irritating mixture of anxiety judgment. "Who are you dating?" "You are 30 years old now, Athena. No respectable man wants a career woman who spends all her nights at a hospital. You need to bring down your standards so that you can get a husband. You need to go out there and actively search. People are whispering, Athena. They are saying you cannot be wife material." Every word felt like a deliberate slap to her face, a systematic devaluation of everything she had bled and cried for. It was a harrowing depiction of social inequality and deep-seated patriarchal norms, where a woman's intellect was viewed as a liability rather than an asset. Athena's mother and aunts acted as the reinforcing walls of this prison, constantly flooding her phone with photographs of eligible bachelors, sending invasive messages about fertility timelines, and treating her singlehood as if it were a tragic, terminal illness. Athena tried to remain polite, explaining that her demanding schedule left little room for superficial romance, but her boundaries were consistently trampled. Her father began taking matters into his own tyrannical hands, aggressively arranging blind dates and formal family introductions without her consent. She vividly remembered coming home from an exhausting 12-hour shift, her hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline, only to find a strange family sitting in her living room, evaluating her like livestock at an auction. Her father had simply looked at her and said, "They are here to see if you are fit to marry their son. Sit down and smile." The emotional trauma of this constant disrespect began to chip away at Athena's formidable armor. She was being forced to go on meaningless, agonizing dates with men who were profoundly incompatible with her, simply to pacify her father's pathological fear of social embarrassment. The parade of suitors her father lined up was a testament to how drastically he was willing to lower the bar just to see her wed. The first introduction was a young man from an immensely wealthy family. A prospect chief, Richard Kingston, worshipped purely for his bank account. However, within 20 minutes of private conversation, Athena discovered the man had a severe ongoing history of substance abuse and a deeply volatile temper, masked by his family's billions. When Athena firmly rejected the match, prioritizing safety and stability, her father exploded in rage, accusing her of rejecting a winning lottery ticket. The next prospect was a traditionalist doctor, who immediately began outlining a terrifying list of rules for how Athena should dress, how she should restrict her social circle, how she would eventually need to scale back her career, because a husband must always be the undisputed sun around which the wife orbits. When she declined him, her father claimed she was being too selective. The third suitor was a software developer who violated her boundaries within the first phone call, shifting the conversation to deeply inappropriate, intrusive personal topics. Suitor after suitor followed. A cardiologist whose fragile masculinity was visibly threatened by Athena's natural height and commanding presence, and another man who demanded her immediate, unquestioning relocation to a distant province, with zero regard for her established surgical career. With every rejection, her father's behavior grew more toxic, his voice harsher, his guilt-tripping more manipulative. He began accusing her of being a failure as a daughter, telling her that all her academic achievements were completely in vain because she refused to conform to society. Athena felt entirely alienated, trapped in a house where her worth was zero, questioning if she had made a mistake by choosing to save lives instead of hunting for a husband. But just as the suffocating pressure reached a boiling point, a seismic shift appeared on the horizon in the form of a new profile. One evening, her father walked into the living room, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered across his face, holding a dossier that he dropped onto the coffee table with theatrical finality. "This one is different," her father announced, his voice booming with absolute certainty. "For the first time, I think we have found the perfect match. He is wealthy, incredibly powerful, highly respected, and he actually agreed to meet an older career woman like you. Do not ruin this, Athena." The profile belonged to a 36-year-old billionaire tycoon named Western Emperor. Western was a legendary figure in the corporate world, an enigmatic mogul who had single-handedly built a massive business empire, known for his cutthroat business acumen, his immense hidden wealth, and his absolute refusal to play by society's rules. He was highly educated, devastatingly handsome, and completely independent. A man whom families across the high society had tried to ensnare for years, only to be met with his cold, unyielding rejection. Western Emperor had a reputation for being impossibly difficult, because he despised superficiality, loathed societal expectations, and openly walked away from any arrangement that lacked genuine authenticity. Athena looked at the photograph of this incredibly powerful man and felt absolutely nothing but a profound, deep-seated exhaustion. She agreed to the meeting simply because she no longer had the strength to fight her father's relentless onslaught. Neither Athena nor Western wanted to be at that elite, quiet restaurant that evening. Both were entering the meeting filled with cynicism, bitterness, and defensive walls built from years of dealing with manipulative matchmakers. They had no idea that their forced introduction was about to ignite a spark that would challenge everything they knew about loyalty, trust, and love. Yet as they sat across from each other, stripping away the polished facades to share raw, brutal truths about their lives, a deep and magnetic connection began to form, threatening to shatter the rigid world around them. But just as Athena allowed herself to taste the forbidden sweetness of hope, just as she began to believe that destiny had finally smiled upon her, a chilling, buried secret from Western Emperor's past was suddenly brought to light by an anonymous source, a hidden truth so massive and potentially devastating that it threatened to completely destroy their fragile bond before it could even begin, leaving Athena standing on the edge of a terrifying precipice where the life she knew was about to turn completely upside down. The chilling revelation concerning Western Emperor's past struck Athena Kingston like a physical blow, fracturing the fragile sanctuary of trust she had only just begun to build. The anonymous informant, a well-placed colleague from an international medical gala who recognized Western's prominent name, casually handed her a folder containing archived Society magazine clippings from 5 years prior. Athena's eyes scanned the glossy pages in absolute disbelief, her heart hammering against her ribs as the grim reality unfolded before her. Western had not merely been involved in a past relationship. He had been deeply, publicly engaged to a woman named Cassandra Vance, the daughter of a notoriously ruthless shipping magnate. The wedding had been touted as the social event of the decade, a grand merging of billions, with venues booked across Europe and invitations sent to global elites. Then, just 3 days before the ceremony, The entire event vanished from existence. The media coverage had been abruptly bought out and silenced, leaving behind only whispers of a catastrophic betrayal that had left Western emotionally ruined and intensely guarded. As Athena sat alone in her office, the stark contrast between the transparent, raw man she thought she had met and this keeper of monumental secrets made the sterile hospital walls feel like they were closing in on her. The agonizing sting was not the existence of a past, but the profound silence Western had maintained about it. They had sat inches apart, trading stories of vulnerability, yet he had actively withheld a massive chapter of his life, leaving her to wonder if his apparent sincerity was nothing more than a highly calculated performance designed to lower her defenses. The fallout from this discovery escalated instantly when Athena returned home, where her father, Chief Richard Kingston, was already waiting like a predator sensing weakness in his prey. Having caught wind of Athena's sudden distance and hesitance to lock in a formal engagement date with the billionaire, Richard cornered her in the grand foyer, his face twisted in an expression of unbridled patriarchal rage. When Athena firmly confronted him with the truth about Western's hidden, shattered engagement, Richard did not offer comfort or understanding. Instead, his reaction was a harrowing display of pure opportunistic greed and deep-seated social cruelty. "What does a dead engagement matter to you, Athena?" Richard bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings as he slammed his fist onto the console table. "Every man of his stature has a history. You are a 30-year-old woman whose clock is ticking loudly in the ears of this entire community, and you want to jeopardize a union with a billionaire over old news? Look at yourself. You are an overeducated career woman whose pride is going to leave her rotting alone in an empty house. If you blow this opportunity because of your ridiculous inflated standards, I will personally ensure this family cuts you off entirely. You will bring shame upon my name no longer." He stood there, the ultimate antagonist, a father willing to auction off his daughter's emotional safety and human dignity to the highest bidder just to secure a prestigious alliance and boast to his aristocratic peers. He openly demanded that she ignore the massive red flag, pocket her integrity, and fulfill her societal role as an obedient, transactional wife material. The emotional abuse inside her own home quickly transformed into a public trial of Athena's character as the antagonistic forces within her community united to crush her spirit. Her aunts and mother launched a coordinated psychological assault, inviting judgmental family friends over under the guise of an intervention, turning every dinner into a toxic tribunal where Athena's life choices were thoroughly dissected. They mocked her surgical career, painting her late nights in the operating room not as heroic acts of saving human lives, but as pathetic, desperate attempts to escape her failure as a woman. A doctor can be replaced by any resident Athena, but a billionaire husband comes once in a lifetime. Her aunt sneered across the table, her eyes dripping with malice and satisfaction at Athena's visible distress. The surrounding society viewed her independence as an offensive anomaly that needed to be corrected, creating a suffocating environment of social inequality where her immense intellect and professional sacrifices were treated as a shameful mental illness. Athena suffered in profound silence, her nights spent crying in the privacy of her car after grueling shifts, her mind bombarded by a relentless storm of self-doubt. The sheer injustice of the situation was staggering. She was a brilliant, compassionate savior of human hearts, yet she was being systematically broken, dehumanized, and reduced to a desperate status symbol by the very people who were supposed to protect her. She remained fiercely true to her principles, refusing to blindly surrender her future to a man who hid his scars. But the heavy toll of fighting both her tyrannical father and a weaponized societal machine was rapidly draining the last reserves of her emotional strength. The suspense tightened to a razor-thin edge when Western Emperor noticed her sudden avoidance and demanded a private meeting at his secluded, high-security corporate penthouse overlooking the city. Athena arrived with her defenses fiercely armed, the folder of old clippings clutched tightly in her trembling hand like a shield against further manipulation. As she stepped into the minimalist, imposing space, she confronted the billionaire tycoon directly, throwing the evidence of his past engagement onto his polished desk. For several agonizing seconds, the silence in the room was deafening, the atmospheric pressure dropping as the core of their entire relationship hung in absolute jeopardy. The viewer is left in breathless anticipation, watching the powerful, enigmatic Western Emperor freeze, as his carefully constructed armor completely cracks under the fierce, honest glare of the young surgeon. The ultimate test of loyalty and kindness had arrived, and as Western slowly closed his eyes, preparing to speak, the narrative reaches a precarious turning point where one single word could either heal the profound rift between them or destroy their shared future forever, leaving Athena trapped in a web of intrigue and high-stakes family drama that has now completely spun out of her control. The tense silence inside Western Emperor's minimalist penthouse became a suffocating weight as the true depths of his hidden past began to unravel, pushing the intrigue and emotional drama to an absolute breaking point. Instead of launching into a defensive corporate tirade or utilizing his immense power to manipulate the narrative, Western's formidable posture visibly slumped, exposing a raw, deeply wounded interior that Athena had never anticipated. With a heavy, trembling sigh, he began to recount the agonizing reality of his shattered engagement to Cassandra Vance. A story not of a casual breakup, but of a calculated, malicious betrayal engineered behind his back. 5 years ago, Western had trusted blindly, placing his heart and his expanding empire into the hands of a woman and a family he believed loved him for who he was. In reality, the Vance family had plotted a hostile corporate takeover of Western's burgeoning tech and logistics kingdom, using Cassandra as a glamorous Trojan horse to gain access to his proprietary data, secret offshore assets, and core operational structures. Just days before the wedding, Western discovered that his fiancée had systematically leaked his multi-billion-dollar trade secrets to his fiercest competitors, nearly forcing his life's work into bankruptcy and completely devastating his capacity to trust another human being. The buyout of the media coverage hadn't been an act of cowardice to hide his shame. It was a desperate, high-stakes legal maneuver to protect the livelihoods of thousands of his employees from a predatory market panic. As Western laid bare the scars of his past, his voice cracking with an intense, suffocating pain, Athena realized that his cold, guarded demeanor was merely a survival mechanism against a world that viewed him solely as a transactional prize, a striking, painful mirror to her own domestic torment. While a fragile understanding began to rebuild between the surgeon and the billionaire, the dark forces in Athena's own home were actively conspiring to accelerate her destruction, celebrating what they believed was their definitive victory over her independence. Chief Richard Kingston, entirely blinded by his pathological greed and desperate desire to marry his daughter into a multi-billion-dollar dynasty, interpreted Athena's emotional exhaustion not as a cry for help, but as complete broken submission. Behind closed doors, the villainous nature of her family truly showed its grotesque face as Richard and her manipulative aunts began making secret corporate and marital arrangements without Athena's knowledge, effectively treating her like an inanimate, tradable commodity. Richard went so far as to secretly draft a formal betrothal and family alliance contract, scheduling an extravagant high society gala where he intended to publicly force an engagement announcement, trapping Athena in front of the city's most powerful elites, where a public refusal would mean her total social exile. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of her father reached a sickening peak. He was heard laughing with his aristocratic peers on phone calls, boasting that he had finally broken his daughter's stubborn, overeducated pride, and forced her to realize that her life-saving medical degree meant absolutely nothing compared to a wealthy man's ring. The viewers are forced to witness the sickening injustice of a father actively sabotaging his own daughter's agency, gleefully plotting to strip away her freedom just to elevate his own fragile social status. The psychological pressure on Athena intensified to a near unbearable level as her family weaponized every cultural guilt trip and societal expectation to ensue, her total compliance. Her mother and aunts systematically alienated her from her supportive colleagues, intercepting her mail, constantly monitoring her movements, and whispering toxic rumors within their social circle that Athena was mentally unstable due to the barren, lonely nature of her career woman lifestyle. Every single evening at the dinner table became a coordinated psychological execution, where her father would vividly describe how she would be completely written out of the family lineage, stripped of her inheritance, and publicly disowned if she did not perform her duty at the upcoming gala. Athena felt utterly suffocated, standing alone in the crosshairs of an entire community that viewed her brilliant mind and compassionate hands as a threatening anomaly that needed to be violently corrected. Yet beneath the crushing weight of her despair, A quiet, fierce resolve began to crystallize within the young surgeon. She was a woman who routinely held human hearts in her hands, navigating life or death crises under extreme pressure. She was not going to let a room full of arrogant traditionalists rewrite her destiny. The tension builds to an agonizing, electric pitch as the night of the grand gala rapidly approaches. With the villainous Kingstons convinced they have successfully cornered their prey, completely unaware that the intricate web of deceit, hidden wealth, and testing of loyalty is about to explode in their faces in a shocking climax that will leave the entire high society completely paralyzed with disbelief. The grand ballroom of the Sapphire Crest estate was a breathtaking display of unbridled opulence, dripping with crystal chandeliers, cascading white orchids, and the clinking glasses of the city's most ruthless high society elites. Chief Richard Kingston walked through the crowd like a conquering emperor, a smug, venomous grin plastered across his face as he openly bragged to judges, politicians, and corporate magnates about the impending announcement that would bond his family to the legendary Western Emperor dynasty. In his mind, the trap was perfectly set. Athena was cornered, dressed in an elegant evening gown her aunts had practically forced her into, standing under the suffocating scrutiny of hundreds of cameras. Richard took the stage, tapping his microphone to quiet the crowd, his voice booming with arrogant triumph as he prepared to execute his ultimate ambush. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, looking down at Athena with an expression of pure dominance, "tonight, we celebrate not just tradition, but the absolute submission of pride to the sacred duty of family. It is my ultimate honor to announce the official betrothal of my daughter, Dr. Athena Kingston, to the master of enterprise himself, Mr. Western Emperor. Athena, step forward and accept your true purpose as a wife." The ballroom erupted into polite applause, her aunts snickering in the front row, whispering loudly about how the arrogant career woman had finally been brought to her knees. The psychological ambush was designed to completely paralyze Athena, leaving her with no choice but to smile, nod, and surrender her life-saving identity to satisfy her father's desperate greed. But the applause died a sudden, horrific death as the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the hall. Western Emperor strode into the room, flanked by a phalanx of high-powered legal counsel and federal auditors, his aura radiating a terrifying, ice-cold fury that made the aristocratic crowd instinctively part before him. He did not walk toward the stage to claim a bride. Instead, he stepped directly in front of Athena, shielding her from the predatory glare of the cameras, before turning his gaze upon Chief Richard Kingston. The billionaire's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel, amplified by a wireless lapel microphone that instantly hijacked the estate's entire audio system. "Chief Richard Kingston, this circus ends tonight," Western declared, his tone dropping with absolute disgust. "You stand here pretending to celebrate family, but the truth is you are an unprincipled, parasitic fraud who has spent the last month trying to auction off your brilliant daughter to secure a lifeline for your own rotting financial carcass." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom as Richard's face instantly drained of all color, his smug grin melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Western signaled his legal team, and within seconds massive projector screens flanking the stage flickered to life, completely exposing the sickening, hidden truth of Richard's secret corporate operations. The unmasking was absolute, brutal, and spectacularly humiliating for the antagonists. The screens displayed verified financial audits, bank statements, and legal forensic reports proving that Chief Richard Kingston had entirely mismanaged the family estate, plunging them into tens of millions of dollars of unpayable debt due to reckless offshore gambling and failed shell company investments. The crowd watched in absolute horror as Western revealed that Richard had secretly forged Athena's medical signature on multi-million-dollar high-interest loan guarantees, plotting to use Western's impending wealth to quietly cover up his massive criminal liabilities before the authorities could seize his assets. "You dared to call this extraordinary woman failure," Western's voice thundered, his hand pointing fiercely at Athena. "You claimed her late nights saving human lives amounted to nothing because she wasn't wife material. The truth is, Athena Kingston is the only person of actual worth, honor, and substance in your entire lineage. She did not need to lower her standards for anyone. It was you, your family, and your superficial society that could never dream of rising to hers." Athena stood tall, her eyes flashing with a magnificent, unyielding fire. the complete triumph of justice washing over her as the heavy chains of familial manipulation disintegrated in front of the entire world. The humiliation of Chief Richard Kingston and his toxic enablers was a sight of magnificent poetic justice. Richard fell back against the podium, sweat pouring down his pale face, his hands trembling violently as he tried to stammer out a pathetic, desperate justification. He turned to his peers, pleading for help, but the very aristocratic friends he had spent his life trying to impress turned their backs on him, whispering in disgust at his exposed criminality and financial ruin. Her aunts and mother collapsed into their chairs, burying their faces in their hands to escape the blinding flashbulbs of the media, utterly shattered by the public annihilation of their social standing. Richard crawled to the edge of the stage, looking down at Athena with tears of pure terror, begging her to use her relationship with Western to save him from bankruptcy and prison, crying out that he was her father and that she owed him her obedience. But it was far too late for apologies. The time for mercy had expired. Athena looked at the broken, exposed man who had tried to systematically crush her soul, and with absolute calmness, dignity, and a piece of her mind that silenced the entire room, she turned her back on him, walking out of the ballroom hand in hand with Western Emperor, leaving the antagonists to drown in the magnificent, chaotic ruins of their own deception. The swift, devastating hammer of karma fell upon the Kingston family with absolute, unforgiving precision, reducing their toxic empire of social arrogance to nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in the shadows of high society. Following the cataclysmic exposure at the gala, federal authorities moved with ruthless efficiency. Chief Richard Kingston was swiftly arrested, indicted on multiple counts of corporate fraud, grand larceny, and the criminal forgery of his daughter's medical credentials. Stripped of his titles, abandoned by his aristocratic peers who vanished like smoke the moment his wealth disintegrated, he was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, forced to swap his tailored suits for a sterile prison uniform. The family's opulent estate, ancestral properties, and luxury vehicles were seized by creditors at public auctions to pay off his massive, hidden gambling debts, leaving Athena's mother and weaponized aunts completely destitute. Forced out of their high society bubble and exiled into a life of relative obscurity and bitter poverty, they finally learned the agonizing weight of the very judgment they had so carelessly inflicted on Athena. They were left to wander a world that no longer cared about their opinions, trapped in the crushing realization that their worth, which they so desperately tied to superficial status, was completely artificial. In stark, beautiful contrast, Athena Kingston's life transformed into a brilliant beacon of freedom, empowerment, and profound self-actualization. No longer weighed down by the toxic, suffocating demands of a patriarchal family structure, her surgical career soared to unprecedented heights. She was appointed as the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at her medical center, completely redefining what it meant to be a successful, independent woman in the modern era. Her relationship with Western Emperor evolved beautifully, built not on societal pressure, transactional contracts, or artificial timelines, but on an unshakable foundation of mutual respect, raw vulnerability, and an ironclad test of loyalty. They didn't rush into a marriage to appease an invisible audience. Instead, they chose to build a shared life as equal partners, fiercely supporting each other's monumental ambitions. Standing in front of the mirror in her new apartment, looking at the confident, radiant woman staring back at her, Athena realized that the greatest victory of her grueling journey wasn't finding love, defying her father, or escaping social exile. The ultimate triumph was the realization that her value had never been up for negotiation, and that a woman's worth can never be measured by her willingness to conform to the expectations of others. In society, especially within deeply traditional and patriarchal communities, a woman's entire existence is far too much reduced to a single archaic metric: how quickly she becomes someone's wife, how quietly she submits to her domestic role, and how much of her own soul she is willing to sacrifice to be labeled as wife material. No one stops to look at the blood, sweat, and tears she poured into her education. No one cares about the late nights, the fierce independence, or the incredible sacrifices she made to stand on her own 2 feet. We live in a world where a woman can literally hold human hearts in her hands and save lives on an operating table, yet still be treated as a failure by her own family simply because her finger lacks a wedding ring. This story is a powerful, unyielding reminder that you must never, under any circumstances, lower your standards or mutilate your own dreams just to satisfy the toxic anxiety of a judgmental society. Your life is not a race against a clock manufactured by fearful people, and your accomplishments are never in vain just because you refuse to settle for anything less than absolute respect. If you haven't found a partner who honors your brilliance, choose to stand alone in your power rather than ruin your future in a cage of obligation. What are your thoughts on Athena's fierce stand against her family? And have you ever faced this kind of suffocating societal pressure in your own life? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community for more deeply emotional, instructive stories of karma and justice. Until next time, remember to protect your peace, value your worth, and never let anyone break your stride. Bye.